The UES Defiance moved through the Zephyrian fleet, like a silver arrow cutting through dark water, and every alien warrior who saw it felt something they had never experienced before. The human battleship was smaller than their smallest cruiser, and carried maybe 1/100th of their combined firepower, but it moved with absolute confidence through the formation that had conquered 17 star systems. War Commander Vex Thule stood on his bridge and watched the human ship approach with growing amazement. In 6 weeks of listening to Jake Morrison's words, he had begun to understand something about the species that called itself humanity, but seeing their response to impossible odds taught him even more. They had sent one ship against 50, and that ship was not running or hiding or trying to negotiate. It was coming straight toward him. "Should we destroy it, Commander?" his weapons officer asked with confusion clear in his voice. "Its shields would not stop even our smallest guns." Vex Thule considered the question and found that he did not know the answer. Military logic said that any enemy vessel entering weapons range should be eliminated immediately. But something about the human ship made him hesitate. It was not behaving like an enemy vessel. It was behaving like something else entirely. "Hold your fire," he ordered. "Let us see what this human captain intends to do." On Kepler Station, Jake Morrison and Lisa Carter watched their screens with amazement as the Defiance passed between the alien warships without firing a shot. The human battleship was beautiful in a way that mining equipment could never be, and they could see the pride of Earth's finest shipbuilders in every line of its hull. "How did they get here so fast?" Lisa asked with wonder in her voice. "They didn't," Jake said quietly. "They left Earth the same day you sent the beacon. Someone decided that Kepler Station was worth risking the most advanced ship in the human fleet." The Defiance continued its approach toward the mining station, and now they could see details of its construction that took their breath away. The hull was inscribed with thousands of names in tiny letters that covered every available surface. The names of every human colony, every exploration ship that had been lost in deep space, every person who had died building humanity's presence among the stars. Captain Ryan Brooks stood on his bridge and felt the weight of those names pressing against his shoulders like the hands of the dead urging him forward. The Defiance carried more than weapons and armor. It carried the collective memory of his species and their determination never to abandon their own people. "Docking bay is clearing," his executive officer reported. "Kepler Station is ready to receive us." Brooks nodded and continued to watch the tactical display. The Zephyrian ships had not moved to intercept his approach, and their weapons remained powered but not locked on target. War Commander Vex Thule was giving him the opportunity to dock with the mining station, and Brooks intended to take it. The docking procedure was completed in absolute silence. No Zephyrian ship moved to interfere, and no challenge came over the communication channels. The alien fleet simply watched as the human battleship connected to the mining station like a parent gathering a lost child into protective arms. Brooks left his bridge and walked through the ship toward the docking port. He wore a simple EVA suit with no decorations or insignia, except for a small patch showing Earth's blue surface against the black of space. His only weapon was the knowledge that 30 billion humans across the galaxy were watching and waiting to see what would happen next. The docking bridge connected the Defiance to Kepler Station, and Brooks walked across it with steady steps that echoed in the artificial gravity field. Behind him, he could feel the presence of his crew, and ahead of him, he could sense the miners and technicians and administrators who had been waiting 6 weeks for someone to come for them. Jake Morrison met him at the station side of the docking port, and the two men looked at each other for a moment without speaking. Brooks saw a civilian administrator who had found the courage to speak truth to power. Jake saw a military officer who had risked everything to answer a call for help. "Captain Brooks," Jake said. "Thank you for coming." "Administrator Morrison," Brooks replied. "Thank you for holding the line." They walked together through the corridors of Kepler Station toward the main control room, and Jake explained what had happened during the 6 weeks since he first spoke to the Zephyrian fleet. The aliens had not moved to attack, but they had not withdrawn either. They remained in position around the station like predators trying to decide if their prey was worth the effort to kill. "War Commander Vex Thule has been asking to speak with whoever was in charge of our response," Jake said. "I think your arrival answered that question." Brooks nodded and activated his communication system. "War Commander Vex Thule, this is Captain Ryan Brooks of the UES Defiance. I understand you wanted to meet with human leadership." The response came immediately. "Captain Brooks, I would speak with you face to face. Will you come aboard my ship?" Jake and Lisa looked at Brooks with alarm. Meeting the Zephyrian commander on his own vessel would be walking into a trap that could close at any moment. But Brooks showed no fear as he considered the invitation. "I'll come aboard your ship," Brooks said, "but Administrator Morrison comes with me." This conversation started with his voice, and it should continue with his participation. There was a long pause before Vex Thule responded. "Agreed. My shuttle will dock with your battleship in 30 minutes. The Zephyrian shuttle was unlike anything the humans had ever seen. It was grown rather than built with organic curves and surfaces that seemed to pulse with their own internal light. War Commander Vex Thule emerged from it wearing ceremonial armor that had been forged from the metals of a dozen conquered worlds. The alien commander was impressive in person, with features that seemed carved from stone, and eyes that burned with the intensity of someone who had never known defeat. But when he looked at Jake Morrison, there was something else in those eyes. Something that might have been respect. "Administrator Morrison," Vex Thule said, "your words have troubled my dreams for 6 weeks. I have come to understand why the galaxy fears humanity." "We don't want to be feared," Jake replied. "We want to be understood." "Perhaps those are the same thing," Vex Thule said. "Your species possesses a strength that my people do not comprehend. You sacrifice for others without hope of reward. You protect the weak when logic says they should be abandoned. You choose hope when experience teaches despair." Captain Brooks listened to the exchange and began to understand what had happened during the 6 weeks he had spent traveling to Kepler Station. Jake Morrison had not just been defending his people. He had been teaching the Zephyrian Armada about a different way of thinking about strength and weakness. "What do you want from us?" Brooks asked. Vex Thule looked at both humans and seemed to be struggling with concepts that his warrior culture had never prepared him to consider. "I want to understand how a species can be weak and strong at the same time. I want to know how you can choose sacrifice over survival and still call it victory." "Come with us," Jake said. "Visit our colonies. Meet our people. See what we're building out here, and why it matters enough to die for." The Zephyrian commander considered this proposal and slowly removed his ceremonial helmet. Beneath it, his features were more human than either Jake or Brooks had expected. The alien warrior looked tired and uncertain, and very much like someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for too long. "My armada will withdraw from this system," Vex Thule said. "But I will remain to learn what you have to teach. Perhaps it is time for my people to discover that there are more ways to be strong than simply conquering others." The Zephyrian fleet began moving away from Kepler Station within the hour. 50 massive warships that had terrorized the galaxy turned and departed without firing a single shot. The miners and technicians on the station watched through viewports as their enemies became distant stars and then disappeared entirely. But War Commander Vexathul remained behind, and in the weeks that followed he learned about human civilization, from people who had chosen to build it with their own hands. He saw how they worked together, and how they solved problems, and how they never stopped believing that tomorrow could be better than today. The story of what happened at Kepler Station spread across the galaxy faster than any hyperspace communication system could carry it. Species that had cowered before Zephyrian might begin to hope that strength could be measured in ways other than the ability to destroy. The Hegemony Council sent ambassadors to Earth to learn more about human philosophy. The Crystalline Collective requested cultural exchanges to study human cooperation. Jake Morrison returned to his duties as station administrator, but he was no longer just managing a mining operation. Kepler Station had become a symbol of humanity's place among the stars, and visitors came from across the galaxy to see where one human voice had changed the course of history. Captain Brooks and the Defiance remained in the system for several months, helping to establish the first interspecies cultural center. The human battleship that had come to fight instead became the foundation for something entirely new, a place where different species could learn from each other without fear of conquest or domination. 6 weeks after Lisa Carter sent her emergency beacon, the signal reached Earth and triggered alarms in the deepest levels of Human Fleet Command. Admiral Kate Sullivan was in her office reviewing deployment reports when her aide burst through the door with a data pad that contained the most frightening words in human military protocol. "Admiral," the aide said with barely controlled panic in her voice, "we have a Protocol 7 activation from the Kepler system." Kate Sullivan had served in the human fleet for 37 years and had never seen a Protocol 7 signal. It was reserved for existential threats to human civilization itself, and the last time it had been activated was during the Proxima Crisis, when an alien disease threatened to wipe out every human colony in 3 star systems. She took the data pad and read Lisa Carter's technical report about the Zephyrian armada surrounding their mining station. 50 capital ships and 100 support vessels commanded by War Commander Vex Thul, who had already conquered 17 star systems. 847 civilians trapped with no possibility of escape or effective resistance. But it was not the military situation that made Kate Sullivan's blood run cold. It was the personal message that Jake Morrison had included with the technical data. He was not asking for rescue or reinforcement. He was asking Earth to remember what Kepler Station had died for and to make sure that their sacrifice meant something. "Get me Captain Ryan Brooks," Kate told her aide. "Tell him to prepare the Defiance for immediate departure." The aide looked confused. "Admiral, shouldn't we assemble a full task force? The Zephyrian armada has 50 capital ships." Kate Sullivan stood up and walked to the window that looked out over Earth's orbital shipyards. She could see dozens of human warships being built or repaired, but none of them were ready for combat against an enemy like the Zephyrians. The human fleet had been designed to protect colonies from pirates and raiders, not to fight a full-scale war against a galactic superpower. "Captain Brooks and the Defiance are what we can send immediately," she said. "If we wait to assemble a larger force, it will be too late to matter." The aide left to deliver the message, and Kate Sullivan continued to stare out at the shipyards. The UES Defiance was the most advanced warship that humanity had ever built, and it carried technology that had taken 50 years of research and development to perfect. But it was still just one ship against 50, and even the most optimistic tactical analysis gave it almost no chance of success in a direct confrontation. Captain Ryan Brooks received his orders 20 minutes later and immediately began preparing for departure. The Defiance was already loaded with supplies and ammunition from its last patrol mission, and the crew was experienced and well-trained. But Brooks knew that this mission would test them in ways that no training exercise could prepare them for. The Defiance was more than just a warship. It was a symbol of everything that humanity had learned during their expansion into space. Its hull was made from materials discovered in the asteroid belts of 6 different star systems. Its weapon systems incorporated technology developed by human colonies working together across hundreds of light years. Its crew represented every major human settlement in the galaxy. Most importantly, the ship carried something that no alien species had ever seen before. Human military doctrine had evolved far beyond the simple concepts of firepower and armor that dominated most galactic conflicts. The Defiance was designed not just to fight, but to represent the values that humanity was willing to die to protect. Brooks stood on the bridge as his crew completed their departure preparations. The view screen showed Earth hanging in space like a blue and white jewel, and he tried to memorize the sight. There was a good chance that none of them would ever see their home world again, but that possibility did not change their mission or their determination to complete it. "All stations report ready for departure," his executive officer announced. "Take us out," Brooks said. "Best possible speed to the Kepler system." The Defiance engaged its hyperspace drive and disappeared from Earth's orbital traffic control sensors. The ship would travel for 6 days through dimensions that human science barely understood before emerging at the edge of the Kepler system, where Jake Morrison had made his stand against the Zephyrian Armada. Back on Earth, Admiral Kate Sullivan began implementing the rest of Protocol 7. Every human colony in the galaxy received priority alerts telling them about the situation at Kepler Station and warning them to prepare for possible Zephyrian attacks. The human fleets, scattered task forces received new orders to consolidate their positions and prepare for war. But the most important part of Protocol 7 was not military preparation. It was the activation of something that humanity called the network. Every human settlement was connected by hyperspace communication relays that could carry messages across the galaxy in a matter of hours. Now those relays carried something more powerful than information. The network allowed humanity to function as a single organism spread across dozens of star systems. When one colony was threatened, the entire species felt that threat and responded accordingly. It was the technological implementation of the philosophy that Jake Morrison had tried to explain to War Commander Vex Thule. Humans did not abandon their own. On the agricultural world of New Kansas, farmers stopped their harvest preparations and began loading transport ships with food and medical supplies for refugee operations. On the industrial moon of Titan, factory workers switched from civilian production to military equipment manufacturing. On the research station at Alpha Centauri, scientists suspended their experiments and began developing new defensive technologies. The response was not coordinated by any central authority. It was spontaneous and immediate and total. 847 people were trapped at Kepler Station, and 30 billion humans across the galaxy responded as if their own families were under threat. Because in the most important sense, they were. Captain Brooks and the crew of the Defiance traveled through hyperspace toward an enemy that outgunned them 50-1, and they were not afraid. They carried with them the hopes and dreams of every human who had ever looked up at the stars and decided that the future was worth fighting for. They carried the names of every explorer who had died pushing into the unknown and every colonist who had sacrificed comfort for the chance to build something better. Most importantly, they carried a message for War Commander Vexthul and his Zephyrian armada. The message was simple and absolute. Humanity protected its own, and no force in the galaxy would ever change that fundamental truth. The Defiance dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system exactly 6 days after leaving Earth. Captain Brooks stood on the bridge and looked at the tactical display that showed the Zephyrian fleet surrounding the small mining station. 50 massive warships bristling with weapons that could crack planets. 100,000 alien warriors trained from birth to conquer and kill. "Communications," Brooks said in a calm, steady voice. "Open a channel to the Zephyrian flagship." The channel opened, and he could feel the weight of history pressing down on the bridge of his ship. What happened in the next few minutes would determine whether humanity's expansion into space would continue or whether it would end in the destruction of everything they had built. "This is Captain Ryan Brooks of the UES Defiance," he said. "War Commander, Vexthul, you have heard our voice. Now see our resolve." The human battleship moved forward into the Zephyrian formation, with its shields blazing and its weapons powered but not targeted. It passed between alien warships that could have destroyed it with a single salvo and continued toward the mining station where Jake Morrison waited with 846 other humans who refused to surrender their dreams. Behind the Defiance. The hyperspace wake of its passage carried a signal that would reach Earth in 6 weeks. The signal contained 3 words that would be remembered for as long as humanity existed among the stars. "We have arrived." Jake Morrison's words did not stop at the Zephyrian fleet. The mining station's communication array was designed to coordinate operations across an entire star system, and now it broadcast his voice far beyond the immediate danger that surrounded Kepler Station. The signal traveled through hyperspace relays and emergency channels, reaching alien civilizations that had been watching the Zephyrian expansion with growing fear. On the crystal world of Nexus Prime, the collective's war machines detected the transmission and immediately began analysis. Nexus Prime was the central intelligence that coordinated their military response to external threats, and it had been calculating the probability of Zephyrian invasion for several months. The humans were a minor factor in those calculations, but now their words demanded attention. The crystalline beings did not understand emotion the way organic species did, but they recognized patterns of behavior, and the human speech contained patterns they had not seen before. Most conquered species either surrendered immediately or fought with desperate fury until they were destroyed. This human was doing neither. He was teaching. Senator Clymoth of the Hegemony Council received the transmission while reviewing reports about Zephyrian military movements near their border systems. The Hegemony had dismissed humanity as irrelevant when they first encountered human explorers 20 years ago. They were a young species with limited technology and no significant military power. But the words coming through the communication system made Clymoth reconsider that assessment. The senator had personally negotiated surrender terms with 17 different species as the Zephyrian armada swept through their territories. Each time the pattern was the same. Initial defiance followed by desperate bargaining and finally complete submission to Zephyrian rule. But this human administrator was following a completely different script. On the nomadic ship cities of the Void Wanderers, ancient navigation computers recorded Jake Morrison's transmission and stored it alongside thousands of other communications they had collected during their travels between the stars. The Wanderers were explorers who had chosen to live in space rather than settle on planets, and they recognized something familiar in the humans' words. Captain Zara Lynn commanded one of the largest Wanderer fleets, and she ordered her communication officers to boost the signal and retransmit it to other nomadic groups scattered across the galaxy. The humans were describing a philosophy that the Wanderers understood. They were talking about choosing the difficult path because it led to something better. Back on Kepler Station, Lisa Carter worked frantically at her engineering console while Jake continued to speak to the silent alien fleet. She had activated the emergency beacon system, and now she was pushing it far beyond its normal operational limits. The beacon was designed to call for help from nearby human ships, but Lisa was using it for something else entirely. The signal she was sending would travel through a network of hyperspace relays directly to Earth, and when it arrived, it would trigger protocols that had not been used in 50 years. Lisa had learned about Protocol 7 during her engineering training, but she never thought she would actually need to use it. It was reserved for threats to human civilization itself. On the Zephyrian flagship, War Commander Vex Thule stood motionless as Jake Morrison's words echoed through his mind. The human was still speaking, but Vex Thule was no longer listening to the words. He was listening to something deeper. The tone of absolute conviction that came from someone who had seen the worst of his species and still believed in their potential for good. The Zephyrian warrior had conquered 17 star systems by following simple principles. Identify the enemy's weaknesses. Apply overwhelming force. Accept surrender or destroy resistance. But none of those principles seemed to apply to the situation he faced now. The humans were clearly weak and completely outnumbered, but they were not behaving like any enemy he had ever faced. "Commander?" His second-in-command spoke quietly. "The warrior clans are requesting permission to begin the assault. They grow confused by this delay." Vexthul looked at his subordinate and saw the same confusion that he felt reflected in the younger warrior's eyes. Zephyrian military doctrine did not include provisions for enemies who tried to educate their conquerors instead of fighting them. "Tell the clans to maintain positions," Vexthul said. "I want to hear what else this human has to say." The second-in-command left to relay the orders, and Vexthul returned his attention to the communication system. Jake Morrison was talking about human colonies now, and the sacrifices that people made to build them. He was describing a species that chose hope over fear, even when hope seemed impossible. On distant worlds, alien leaders listened to the same words and began to understand why the Zephyrian Armada had stopped its advance. The human was not just defending his own people. He was teaching the galaxy something about what it meant to choose growth over conquest and cooperation over domination. The Hegemony Council called an emergency session to discuss the implications of what they were hearing. Senator Clymoth stood before the assembled representatives and played Jake Morrison's transmission for the full council. When it finished, the chamber remained silent for several minutes. "This human speaks of strength through sacrifice," Clymoth said. "Of power through protection rather than domination. If the Zephyrians are listening to these words, then perhaps they are capable of change." Other council members expressed doubt and fear. The Zephyrian Armada had never shown mercy before, and there was no reason to believe they would start now. But Clymoth had heard something in the human's voice that gave him hope. It was the sound of someone who had looked into the darkness and chosen to light a candle instead of cursing it. On Kepler Station, Jake Morrison felt the weight of 847 lives pressing down on his shoulders, but he did not stop speaking. His voice remained calm and steady as he told the story of humanity's journey to the stars. He talked about the mistakes they had made, and the lessons they had learned, and the dreams that drove them forward. "We know what it's like to be the strong ones who take what we want," Jake said. "We spent thousands of years doing exactly that to each other. But we learned that real strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. Real power comes from protecting the weak, not exploiting them." Lisa finished her work at the engineering console and looked at Jake with something approaching awe. She had known him for 3 years as a competent administrator who kept the mining operation running smoothly, but now she was seeing something else. She was seeing a leader who understood that some things were worth dying for, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon was the willingness to speak truth to power. The signal from the emergency beacon reached the hyperspace relay network and began its journey toward Earth. It would take 6 weeks for the message to arrive, but when it did, it would trigger responses that Jake Morrison could not imagine. Humanity had learned many lessons during their climb from a war-torn world to a spacefaring civilization, and one of the most important was that they never abandoned their own. On the crystal world of Nexus Prime, the collective's war machines completed their analysis of Jake Morrison's transmission. The patterns they had detected indicated something unprecedented in their database of conquered species. The humans were not just fighting for their lives, they were fighting for their principles, and they were willing to die rather than compromise them. This information was immediately transmitted to the collective's allies throughout their sector of the galaxy. Species that had been preparing for Zephyrian invasion suddenly had new data to consider. If the humans could make the Zephyrian armada pause through words alone, then perhaps there were alternatives to surrender or destruction. Jake Morrison continued to speak, and his words continued to spread. Every alien civilization that received the transmission was forced to reconsider what they thought they knew about humanity and about the nature of strength itself. The small mining station on the edge of known space had become the focal point of a galaxy-wide conversation about what it meant to be truly powerful. But the most important listener was still War Commander Vex Thul, and he had not yet decided what he would do with the lesson that Jake Morrison was teaching him. The silence that followed Jake Morrison's question stretched across space like a held breath. On board 50 Zephyrian warships, thousands of alien warriors stopped what they were doing and listened to their communication systems. The humans. Voice had reached every ship in the fleet, and now they waited to see what their war commander would do. Vex Thul stood on the bridge of his flagship and felt something strange happening in his chest. In 20 years of conquest, he had heard many species beg for mercy or try to bargain for their lives. But this human was different. There was no fear in his voice and no desperation. Just a simple question that somehow demanded an answer. "Speak. Quickly, human," Vex Thul said. "My warriors grow restless for battle." Jake looked at Lisa, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. He took a deep breath and began to speak in the same calm, steady voice that had carried him through 4 years of military service and 3 years of running a mining station on the edge of known space. "My name is Jake Morrison, and I come from a planet called Earth," he said. "It's a small blue world that orbits a yellow star, and for most of our history we never looked up at the night sky and dreamed of traveling between the stars. We were too busy fighting each other." On the Zephyrian flagship, War Commander Vex Thul listened with growing confusion. Why was this human telling him about their home world when death was only minutes away? What purpose could these words serve except to waste time that had already run out? For thousands of years we killed each other over land and resources and ideas about how people should live, Jake continued. We built weapons that could destroy entire cities, and we used them. We poisoned our air and water with industrial waste, and we didn't care because we were too focused on being stronger than our neighbors. Aboard the Zephyrian ships, warriors paused in their preparations for battle. The humans' words were being translated by their communication systems, but something in his tone needed no translation. It was the voice of someone who had seen terrible things and learned from them. "We almost destroyed ourselves," Jake said. 3 times we came close to turning our beautiful blue world into a dead rock floating in space. The last great war killed 200 million people and left whole continents uninhabitable. When it was over, we looked at what we had done and made a choice. Lisa watched Jake speak and saw something in his face that she had never seen before. He was not just talking to the alien fleet. He was remembering his own history and the history of his species, and finding strength in both the failures and the victories. "We chose to do better," Jake said. "We chose to work together instead of against each other. We chose to heal our world instead of poisoning it. And when we finally reached the stars, we brought those lessons with us." War Commander Vexthal found himself leaning forward to listen more carefully. The human was describing a species that had conquered itself before conquering space. This was not something the Zephyrians understood. They had always been warriors, and their entire culture was built around the idea that the strong should rule the weak. "Every human settlement in this galaxy exists because someone was willing to risk everything to build something better," Jake continued. "The people on this station left their families and their comfortable lives on Earth to dig minerals out of asteroids in a system so far from home that the sun looks like just another star. The alien warriors listened and tried to understand what they were hearing. The human was talking about sacrifice, but not the kind of sacrifice that warriors made in battle. This was different. This was about choosing to leave safety behind for the chance to create something new. "We don't conquer planets," Jake said. "We plant gardens on them. We don't enslave other species. We try to learn from them. We don't fight wars for glory or territory. We fight only when someone threatens the people we care about." On the Zephyrian flagship, something strange was happening. War Commander Vexthal had stopped pacing, and his warriors had stopped preparing for battle. They were all listening to the human's voice and trying to understand why his words seemed to carry so much weight. "You want to know why humans are dangerous," Jake said, and his voice grew stronger. "We're dangerous because we don't know how to give up on each other. When one of our colonies is threatened, we don't calculate the cost of helping them. We don't weigh the strategic value of their location or their resources. We just come running, because that's what families do." Lisa felt tears starting in her eyes as she listened to Jake speak. She had never heard him talk like this before, but she knew that every word was true. Humanity had spread across the galaxy not through conquest, but through the simple determination to never abandon their own people. "Every human ship carries the names of our dead," Jake continued. "Every colony remembers the explorers who died to find it. Every child learns the stories of the people who gave their lives so that humanity could reach the stars. We carry our history with us not as a burden, but as a promise." The communication channels of the Zephyrian fleet crackled with confused voices. Warriors who had never questioned an order were asking their commanders what they should do. Some wanted to attack immediately and silence the human's voice. Others wanted to keep listening to words they had never heard before. "You think we're weak because we're small," Jake said. "You think we're cowards because we prefer peace to war. But you're wrong about what makes us strong. Our strength doesn't come from our weapons or our technology. It comes from our refusal to abandon hope. War Commander Vexthul felt something shifting in his mind, like a wall that had stood for 20 years suddenly developing cracks. The human was describing a kind of strength that the Zephyrian military academies never taught. A strength that came not from defeating enemies, but from protecting friends. "We know you're going to destroy us," Jake said, and his voice remained steady despite the truth of those words. "Your ships are more powerful than anything we have, and your warriors are trained from birth to fight and win. But before you pull those triggers, I want you to understand something about the people you're about to kill." The entire Zephyrian fleet had gone silent now. 50,000 alien warriors listened to one human voice speaking across the darkness of space with words that seemed to echo in places they didn't know they had. "We came out here to build something better than what we left behind on Earth," Jake said. "The miners on this station work 16-hour shifts in dangerous conditions because they believe in a future where human children will have clean air to breathe and safe places to play. The engineers push technology to its limits because they dream of the day when no human will have to choose between survival and exploration." Lisa reached out and took Jake's hand as he spoke. She could feel the strength in his voice spreading through the station as other humans gathered around communication panels to listen to their administrator speak for all of them. "Every person on this station volunteered to come here," Jake said. "They knew the risks and they came anyway because they believed in something bigger than themselves. That's what you're destroying when you fire those weapons. Not just 847 lives, but 847 dreams of a better tomorrow." The last words hung in space like a challenge and a benediction. Jake Morrison had spoken for his species and for his people, and now there was nothing left to do but wait for the Zephyrian response. But War Commander Vexthul did not respond. For the first time in his military career, he had heard something that made him question everything he thought he knew about strength and weakness and what it meant to be a warrior. The alarm screamed through every corridor of Kepler Station, and Jake Morrison knew their time was up. He stood in the main control room, watching the screens that showed space around their small mining outpost, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Dark ships filled the view like a swarm of angry insects, and each one was bigger than anything humans had ever built. The Zephyrian Armada had found them. Lisa Carter ran into the control room with grease on her hands and worry in her eyes. She had been working on the mining equipment when the alarm started, and now she looked at the screens with the same fear that Jake felt in his chest. 847 people lived on Kepler Station, and all of them were about to die unless something changed very fast. The largest of the alien ships moved closer to the station, and Jake could see the strange patterns on its hull that seemed to pulse with their own dark light. The Zephyrians had conquered 17 star systems in the past 10 years, and every species that faced them either surrendered or got wiped out completely. Their biomechanical ships could crack planets in half, and their warriors were said to feel no fear at all. "How many ships do you count?" Jake asked Lisa as she worked at one of the control panels. "Too many," she said without looking up from her work. "At least 50 of the big ones and maybe 100 smaller attack craft. Our defense grid might stop 3 or 4 of them before they blow us apart." Jake nodded and felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. He had been the station administrator for 3 years now, but before that, he served in the Earth Navy as a communications officer. He knew how to talk to people and how to make hard decisions, but he had never faced anything like this before. The communication system crackled to life, and a voice filled the control room. It was deep and rough, like stones grinding against each other. And when it spoke, the words came through the translation system with a strange accent that made Jake's skin crawl. "Small human nest. the voice said. "I am War Commander Vexthul of the Zephyrian Third Armada. You will surrender now and give us your mining equipment and all your technology. Do this, and we will let half of you live as slaves. Refuse, and we will turn your station into dust and memories." Lisa looked at Jake with questions in her eyes, but he held up one hand to keep her quiet. He had heard stories about Zephyrian negotiations before and knew that the alien commander was being generous by his own standards. Most species never got offered the chance to become slaves. "This is Administrator Jake Morrison of Kepler Station," he said into the communications system. "We are a peaceful mining operation with families and children aboard. We have no military value and pose no threat to your forces." The alien commander laughed, and the sound was like metal being torn apart. "All humans pose a threat simply by existing," Vexthul said. "Your species spreads like a plague across the galaxy, taking resources that belong to stronger races. We have studied your history and know that you fight wars against your own kind with terrible weapons. This makes you dangerous even when you are weak." Jake felt something twist in his stomach at those words. The Zephyrians had studied human history and probably knew about the great wars that nearly destroyed Earth before humanity reached the stars. They knew about the nuclear weapons and the biological plagues and the millions of people who died in conflicts that served no purpose except to prove who was stronger. "We left those wars behind us," Jake said. "Humanity learned from its mistakes, and now we explore the galaxy in peace." "Peace." Vexthul repeated the word like it tasted bad in his mouth. "There is no peace in the galaxy. There is only the strong who take what they want and the weak who give it to them. You will choose which one you are in the next 10 minutes, or we will choose for you." The communication channel went silent, and Jake stared at the screens showing the alien fleet. Each ship bristled with weapons that could punch through the station's shields like they were made of paper. The Zephyrians had perfected the art of war over centuries of conquest, and they had never met a species they could not defeat. Lisa finished her work at the control panel and turned to face Jake with determination in her eyes. "The emergency beacon is ready," she said. "If we send it now, the signal will reach Earth in about 6 weeks. 6 weeks, Jake repeated. "We'll be dead in 10 minutes. "Maybe," Lisa said, "but at least Earth will know what happened here, and they can warn the other colonies." Jake thought about that for a moment. Earth was 50 light-years away, and the human fleet was spread thin across dozens of star systems trying to protect settlements just like Kepler Station. Even if they got the message in time, there was no way they could send help fast enough to matter. The alien ships moved closer, and Jake could see smaller craft detaching from the main vessels, boarding parties getting ready to take the station, by force if the humans refused to surrender. He had read reports about what happened when the Zephyrians boarded enemy ships, and the stories always ended the same way. "There has to be another option," he said to Lisa. "Something we haven't thought of yet." "Like what?" she asked. "We have a mining laser that might scratch their paint, and a defense grid that was designed to stop asteroids, not warships. We're completely outgunned and outnumbered." Jake walked to the main communication console and stared at the controls. His fingers moved over the buttons without pressing them as an idea began to form in his mind. It was probably suicide, but then again, everything else was definitely suicide. "What if we don't fight them?" he said. "You want to surrender?" "No," Jake said. "What if we talk to them? Really talk to them? Not just the commander, but the whole fleet?" Lisa looked at him like he had lost his mind. "Jake, they're warriors. They don't want to talk. They want to conquer." "Everyone wants something," Jake said. "Even warriors. even conquerors. Maybe if we can figure out what they really want, we can find a way to give it to them without dying." The communication system crackled again, and War Commander Vex Thul's voice filled the room. "Your time grows short, humans. We grow tired of waiting for your surrender." Jake reached for the communication controls, and Lisa grabbed his arm. "What are you going to say to them?" "I don't know yet," Jake admitted. "But I spent 4 years in the Navy learning how to talk to people, and maybe that includes aliens who want to kill us. Sometimes the right words at the right time can change everything." He activated the broadband communication array that was normally used to coordinate mining operations across the system. Now it would broadcast his voice to every ship in the Zephyrian fleet. War Commander Vex Thul would hear him, but so would every warrior under his command. "This is Jake Morrison speaking to the Zephyrian Armada," he said in a clear, steady voice. "Before you destroy us, I want to tell you something about who we are and why we came to the stars. Will you listen?"